Welcome to Hucknall. We're here to celebrate over 60 years of commitment, excellence and dedication. Since 1935, Rolls-Royce test has been carried out here at Hucknall. High time then that we celebrate some of the characters that has made this Rolls-Royce premier test establishment. A celebration of Hucknall's heroes. This is the stuff that youngsters' dreams are made of. The engine is built, but it's test that proves the thing is worthwhile. It's test that proves that the engine will do what they say it will do. It's test that's made Rolls-Royce what it is today. In 1935, Rolls-Royce began flight testing at Hucknall. This is where we meet our first hero of Hucknall, A.J. Rowledge. During the First World War, Rolls-Royce were content to leave flight test in the hands of airframers. However, there were many failures due to incorrect installation, and Rowledge was convinced that test and installation should be within the province of Rolls-Royce. Late in 1934, 2 Belfast Trust hangars were occupied at RAF Hucknall. A Hart and a Gloucester Nat Snapper II was transferred from Tollerton, and 2 pilots arrived. Captain Ron Shepherd, who became chief test pilot, and Ronnie Harker. Heroes both. There were 2 ground staff engineers and a small number of technical staff. Cyril Lovesey was placed in charge during the initial months until his place was taken by a brilliant and enthusiastic engineer, Ray Dorey. This then was the beginning. Instead of leaving it to the Air Forces and airframers, Rolls-Royce had its own flight test facility, a role that was to become very important. War clouds were looming, but more of that in a moment. By the end of the first year of operation at Hucknall, it was evident that with the introduction of new and more powerful engines, the slow biplanes with fixed undercarriages and open cockpits were becoming an embarrassment. Rolls-Royce started to look around for a more suitable aircraft. To do this, they had to go to Germany, where they found the ideal aircraft in the Heinkel HE-70. On the 27th of March 1936, Captain Shepherd flew the Heinkel to Hucknall. A variety of tests took place over a 3.5-year period, just before the outbreak of the Second World War. What irony then, that a German aircraft helped Rolls-Royce and the RAF to beat them in the air during the summer of 1940. The work at Hucknall during the Second World War, and particularly development of the Merlin engine, was very important. With the experience gained from the Battle of Britain, a lot more development and better engines were required. So Rolls-Royce took on the job of repairing and converting the Hawker Hurricanes for the RAF, and at the same time fitting a new Merlin 20 engine. They also carried out repairs and conversion of the Spitfire by fitting a Merlin 45 engine. New improved marks of Merlin engines were being sent from Derby for testing, either on special open-air test beds which had been built or flown in the test aircraft. And the beginning of 1942 saw the first flight of the Mark IV Spitfire with a Merlin 60 series intercooled engine. Also during 1942, the first 100 hours extended development flying was completed on the Merlin 20, which had been installed in a new 4-engine bomber, the Avro Lancaster. This became the most famed bomber aircraft of the war. It also became the backbone of testing after the war, being used as a flying testbed for a host of new and modified engines for civil airliners. In April of that year, Ronnie Harker, one of Rolls-Royce liaison test pilots, was invited to go and test a North American Mustang powered by an Allison engine. He was very impressed with the handling, and it had a number of desirable features. Most importantly, it had low drag, which gave it a very noticeable increase in top speed over both the British and German contemporary fighters. But the low full-throttle height limit of the Allison engine made its overall performance only adequate for low-altitude operation. Harker stated that the only improvement that could be made to the Mustang would be the installation of a Rolls-Royce Merlin engine. On his return to Hucknall, he made out a complete report, together with all the expected performance data, which had been performed by Hucknall's flight development performance expert, Whittle Challier, and then went to speak to Lord Hives to try to persuade him to authorise a trial installation of a Merlin 61 engine. This he did, and arranged with Air Marshal Sir Wilfrid Freeman at the Ministry for 5 aircraft to be allocated to Hucknall to be converted and carry out different aspects of development flying before going into production. This then was the start of how the Mustang became one of the greatest piston engine fighters ever built, and started its career at Rolls-Royce Hucknall.
I think the biggest change was from piston engine aircraft to the jet era, starting with the Griffin and the Merlin and the Peregrine and engines like that, into the later jet engines of Spays and Tynes and Conways.
You had 2 sections then, basically. You had the people that were keyed up on piston engines, and you had this new group that were looking at jet engines.
The start of the jet age at Hucknall was very secret. Only a few people were involved. In August 1942, a Wellington bomber arrived with a strange pointed tail where the gun turret should have been. Inside, there was a secret experimental engine installed. No one was allowed to go near the aircraft, except the chosen few. The aircraft carried out a total of 9 hours testing this secret jet engine, carrying out initial handling and development. The experimental engine I referred to was later called the Welland, and in 1945 it was installed into the first jet fighter, the Gloucester Meteor. It went into service with the RAF and started a new era of jet engine development at Hucknall in the same way the piston engine did. The technology associated with such things as compressor stall, flameouts, surging, intakes, turbines and jet pipes was all new, and so the learning began.
When I came in here for the first time, I was amazed. I was a lad that was always interested in model aircraft flying, and when I saw the real thing and being involved with it, it was completely different.
It was new. That was the point. It was new, and to be in something at ground level, it was exciting.
A new, more powerful engine was named the Derwent and replaced the Welland in the Meteor, which became very successful and went into service with the RAF.
The Derwent was a 3,700 pound thrust engine.
Back at Hucknall in 1946, 2 of the 7 Lancasters, one, the VH-742 flying testbed, was modified to install 2 new jet engines called the Neen. The 2 outboard Merlin engines were removed and the Neen jet engines installed, and the 14th of August 1946 saw the first flight of VH-742 using these old Lancaster bombers. A new twin-engine aircraft was being built by English Electric called the Canberra, which was powered by a new Rolls-Royce engine, the Avon. This was a completely new engine with an axial compressor, and although it still had the individual flame tubes which made the engine longer than the Derwent and Neen, it was a lot more powerful. At the same time, Rolls-Royce was persevering with the Neen, and 2 engines were installed into a Canberra to continue its development. The Canberra was a streamlined aircraft and became an excellent flying testbed to develop the new Avon engine. Testing continued over a period of time, including a very special installation, as one of the engines had a water spray grid rigged in front of it, and it was used extensively on artificial icing trials. It carried out this special kind of testing for many years. By this time, more powerful marks of Avon engines were coming off the Derby testbeds to be flight tested. The engine had been considerably modified. The individual flame tubes had gone and an annular flame tube had been designed. An additional turbine was added and different type of air bleed valve fitted, making the engine a lot slimmer looking, and it made the installation in the aircraft more streamlined. In order to carry out all these flight test programs, Hucknall had expanded quite considerably. 6 more hangars had been built, a tarmac runway laid, complete with concrete aircraft parking and ground running strip. Special open-air testbeds had been built to carry out additional test programs to flying. To test aerodynamic problems, 3 wind tunnels had been built. These were powered by Derwent and Neen engines. Small models were made and installed in 2 of the tunnels to test airflow problems, and 1 was used to test fire extinguisher systems. A full-scale engine was rigged complete with a fire extinguisher system. The 2-tunnel Neen engines ran to create airflow around the test installation, and then the assembly was deliberately set on fire. At the desired condition, the fire extinguisher system was activated and its effectiveness assessed. Other testbeds were used to carry out full-scale failure tests of engine compressors and turbines, bird ingestion and noise tests.
The ideas had to come from the individuals, and sometimes at the time and the point when you were actually, as you said, in the middle of actually physically doing something.
Every test you could think of that we needed to do, which is rain ingestion, hail ingestion, bird ingestion, blade off, all those sort of tests, noise, was all done here.
Test facilities, as far as engines were concerned, we're obviously going to expand here because there's the room to build additional test facilities.
The Neen was already a stalwart of test, but manages hero status when it became involved in what turned out to be a very famous event. In the early 1950s, a proposal made by Dr. A. Griffiths of Rolls-Royce started a chain of events which had far-reaching consequences. This was for a jet-borne test rig for experimental investigation into stability and control concerning vertical thrust using the exhaust gas from a jet engine. Its official designation was Thrust Measuring Rig, or TMR, but it soon affectionately became known as the Flying Bedstead. An area on the aircraft hard standing not far from where I am now was prepared complete with a special concrete square, and the first flight, piloted by Captain Ron Shepherd, took place on the 3rd of August 1954 before an audience of many distinguished people.
It was a bit like trying to balance a ping pong ball on a jet of water. Captain Shepherd was he was one of these pilots that flew with the seat of his pants, if you like. He was a terrific pilot, and he was the one that first went free flight down the hard standing on the Flying Bedstead.
Moving on from one famous engine to another, and one of the largest. In the 50s, Rolls-Royce was in development of the Conway engine, which started its flight test here at Hucknall. It was installed as a complete pod power plant, slung under the fuselage of an Avon development airliner called the Ashton, which was a modified Tudor powered by 4 Rolls-Royce Neen jet engines. Also, one of the wing hangar testbeds was completely modified from piston engine to jet engine testing. A complete power plant and aircraft pylon was installed to provide development for a new American Boeing 707 airliner. Hundreds of hours endurance testing was carried out in conjunction with the development being carried out on the Ashton.
The easiest and probably the best engine I remember as regards to testing must have been the Conway. We never seemed to have a great deal of trouble with the Conway. It seemed to have gone through fairly well. And of course that was the first of the bypass engine.
I used to like the Conway. It gave you little problems, but it was the first bypass engine, and it broke into a new era.
The Conway was a good, sound, reliable engine, and it had most of the attributes that we had tried to work for and tried to achieve.
The largest Conway built was the RCO 42 and 43, which powered the VC-10 airliner.
I remember the Conways for the VC10. That was quite a knife-edge job really, because if I remember rightly, the VC10 had to take off on a limited length runway near their place, which meant it had to go to a very high angle of attack.
An engine of this size was very heavy on fuel consumption, and the noise levels were, by today's standards, extremely high. A completely new design was needed, a design which combined fuel efficiency with the capability of low noise. The first turbofan engine came out of this, and the RB211 was born.
I was here when it started, and they took some of our designers on loan to help out in the design offices at Derby, which was good because it gave Derby a concept of what the Hucknall people were like, and it gave Hucknall people a concept of what the Derby people was like, because it did tend to be separate in those days.
Nothing like this had ever been seen before. Power plants up to 8 feet in diameter, with a new fan design casing completely covering the core jet engine. Part of the ducting was able to translate rearwards to act as a thrust reverser by blowing the fan air forwards. And this, all designed into one package. This was new technology indeed.
It made the spade look like a starter motor.
Obviously the 211 was the big one, which changed a lot of concepts, and it was bigger, it was more powerful.
The fan blades were made of carbon fibre for lightness. This was a specially processed material made at Hucknall.
Well, the engine itself was a brilliant engine, no doubt about that. The problem was, of course, the low pressure fan at the front end that was made by carbon fibre.
And the first engine we ran up there with a carbon fibre blade, all sorts of things happened to it. We had all sorts of failures, and of course they went on to the titanium blade afterwards.
And to test this engine, 2 new open-air test beds had to be built. One of them, 9-bed, became the Rolls-Royce Master Performance Thrust and Noise Bed, against which all the other beds were calibrated. New methods of transmitting the engine control system were developed. Computer and digital readouts were employed. An open area with microphones to monitor engine and fan noise levels was laid out all round the test cradle.
We had really no test beds that would take that sort of engine. So we started modifying and building new test beds.
Indoor test beds could not give the proper performance figures. So outdoor test beds were needed for better performance figures, and also the more severe testing, of course, which had to be done outside, was blade off, birdshot work, and of course all the noise work.
The pressure was something really enormous at times, because people were worried and concerned about their aspect of the job. And the photography was always taken as a, well, okay, we'll have a picture. There's quite a lot more to it than that.
A BAC VC-10 aircraft had been chosen to test fly the new engine. The 2-port Conway engines were removed from the aircraft fuselage and an RB211 pod installed at Hucknall. It made its first flight in 1970. However, it was announced that flying would cease from Hucknall in 1971. Indeed, 1971 was a landmark year, and not for the best of reasons.
Well, of course, February the 4th was a day that anyone who was working at Rolls-Royce then will never forget.
When the crash came, I mean, there were so many people. I mean, I got guys in tears. I never thought I'd see grown-up people crying. And I was virtually the same.
Not a soul knew whether you got a job tomorrow.
I was devastated. I'd worked in flight all that time. I'd concentrated the latter years in life looking after the VC-10, and when the time came when the firm went in liquidation, I was offered a position on the test beds as an engine tester.
An era spanning 40 years of flight test development had come to an end. Despite many attempts to avoid this decision, on the 8th of March 1972, the last flying testbed aircraft took off from Hucknall. Flight test was transferred to Bristol. Testing on the special open air and closed testbeds at Hucknall became a lot more important. So let's take a few moments to have a look at some of the hardware heroes of Hucknall. Number 23 bed, the large aerodynamic test facility, had two main functions, one as a suction and the other as a blowing facility. This incredible testbed consisted of 6 Avon engines, each linked into a suction limb, thereby causing a Venturi effect. Each of the 6 Avons was controlled by a separate throttle, and each suction limb was linked into a large plenum chamber, which had a main suction offtake. Full-size and scale models could be adapted for testing on 23 bed. The blowing facility used 2 of the 6 Avons, each having a high-capacity compressor bleed facility, providing hot or cold air to models on test. Another hardware hero, 6 bed. This testbed performed blade failure and containment tests. Really dramatic stuff. The TAE, V2500 and RB211, to name a few, were tested on 6 bed. Number 7 bed, used for development in crosswind, strain gauge and roll and tilt tests. Here's a TAE undergoing cyclic endurance tests for thrust reverser performance. Number 8 bed was the cold room, a cold starting facility for temperatures as low as minus 54 degrees centigrade. We've already mentioned 9 bed. It was used for a wide variety of development testing, including crosswind and cross-calibration, bird ingestion, water ingestion, and ice ball and ice slab ingestion. Number 10 bed was an indoor test bed and was used for bird ingestion tests as well as cyclic and endurance tests. It was also the company's dedicated X-ray facility. Number 11 bed was used for compliance tests for both noise and engine performance. 11 bed boasted ITCS, Inlet Turbulence Control System, more commonly known as the golf ball, which was used to simulate in